welcome. Thank you for being here.
Thanks for having us.
So let's start. Let's start with your sports. You both are in fairly uncommon sports. How did you initially get involved in luging and flipping multiple times in the air on skis at an early age to become an Olympian?
Okay, so I grew up close to Lake Placid in upstate New York, and my parents volunteered at the Olympics in 1980 at the luge track. So I'd been skiing already, and I went with my parents to see luge every day. So I saw the best athletes in the world competing, and Lake Placid it's a really small town, so I kind of got the Olympic bug and I saw figure skating and hockey, and I saw Eric Heiden win his medals, so I was like all excited about the Olympics. And after the games, there was a 2-week luge camp. So my parents let me skip school and go to luge camp. Got on a sled, loved it from the very first time. And at the end of the 2 weeks, I won the Junior Olympics race in my age group. And that was the beginning of the next 18 years on a sled.
And how old were you when you first went to luge camp?
Really? You're going to ask me that now?
I know when you went to luge camp, when you started.
Luge camp.
Yes, I was 11. I was 11, which is pretty typical. So in luge, there are tracks, like a dozen or so tracks around the world, and you don't get very many runs on each track every year. So it really takes years to be good and to be successful internationally. So 10 or 11 is pretty typical for jumping on a sled.
Wow. Yeah. And what about you?
Yeah, well, it's kind of a family affair in our house. So my brother was actually an aerialist on the U.S. ski team for many years, way before I got into it. I was 21 when I actually got into the sport, so a little bit later. But yeah, so my brother was in it, and I was actually at school, going to school down at Florida State University. And yeah, a lot of good skiing down that way. But there wasn't a lot athletically for me to get involved in down there. I was actually riding horses and doing gymnastics growing up a ton, and both my brother and I skied since we could walk. Come from a very, very avid skiing family. But anyway, so I decided I was either going to take a semester off and go to Winter Park, Colorado, and ski where my brother was skiing with a freestyle club there, or I was transferring to University of New Hampshire where there was an equestrian riding team. So I first went to Winter Park, went out there, always thought I'd be a bump skier, a mogul skier. My brother did aerials. I thought he was nuts. There was no way I would have ever done that. So anyway, I went out, and with freestyle, you usually do all the events at a regional level. So I did, and I actually did the best in aerials. So obviously, I didn't transfer to UNH. I ended up coming out to Salt Lake City and training with a coach out there. And basically, I was the only woman training with 5 other men out there. And it took a little convincing for the coach to even let me come and train. So yeah, so it's been kind of, then I was on basically about 12 years on the U.S. team.
So what was that training like from when you first started to right before your first Olympics?
Yeah.
What was the schedule like, and the effort that goes into becoming one of the best in your sports in the world?
Yeah, absolutely. Do you want?
Sure.
Go ahead.
I can start. So I was on the national team for 14 years, and I think Tracy will probably agree. Competing on the level that we did is basically a full-time job. So the off season is when most of the really intense physical training takes place. So for luge, they're kind of 2 components, and it's the start, which is the only chance that you have to accelerate the sled, and then once you pull off from the handles and you wear spikes on your fingertips, paddle down the ramp, and then you lie down, and then it's all about skill and how well you can drive the lines. So in the summertime, we would do a lot of sort of basic training at first, and then it's all about sort of power and quickness and speed on the start. So a lot of upper body, back, core work, and a lot of Olympic lifting in the summertime, and then in the winter, we would be on the road from usually the beginning of October until December. So usually 10 weeks in the fall. You'd come home for a week at Christmas, and it was kind of enough time to wash your clothes, eat a couple of meals that your mom made, and then back on the road for another 8 weeks for the World Cup and World Championship season. Wow. So definitely kind of year-round. And I was able to work, actually, undergrad into that schedule because I went to Dartmouth and it's on quarters, so I would go with the luge team in the fall and winter, and then I'd go to school in the spring and summer. I was there for a little longer than 4 years.
Yeah. So for aerials, basically it starts on a trampoline, and there are hours and hours of refining your skills for doing backflips and twists and multiple flips and all of that. And you're in a big harness as well, which has a spinning belt. So that's attached to rope. So there's a lot. Trampoline training is a really, really big facet of it. Then you actually transfer it to water ramping, where you're coming down. There's Lake Placid and Park City have 2 water ramp facilities. And you come down the ramps on plastic surface, go off and land into a big swimming pool with all your skis, your boots. You have a life jacket on, you usually have a dry suit or a wetsuit, and a helmet, of course. And I've always had the question, do your ski boots get wet? And I'm like, oh, yeah, they get wet. And we break skis and all sorts of things. And water does hurt. It's a great way to train. That's where like I said, there's a very long process in taking what you see on snow. There's a qualification process for every single jump that you do on snow. So you have to do it a certain number of times. You have to qualify it in front of a U.S. team coach safely 5 times in a row. And then you're able to transfer it onto snow once the season starts. And then, I think like what Cameron said, I think one of the misconceptions about Olympic athletes is that the only thing they train for and compete in are the Olympics. And we have a World Cup circuit that we are on every single year. And so it goes...
You might not see our sports except
right.
at the Olympics, but on TV. But.
Right, and we have world championships every other year. So we were on tour from December, all the way to April every year. And then our summer training also, we would do trampoline starting in May, through October. So we had a little bit of time off in April, a little bit of time off in October, but other than that, it was year-round training for sure.
Yeah, and so you've obviously did a lot of the trampoline training, all these things. How have you seen the training evolve from when you started doing it your first couple years to where we are today with the technology and the advancements that have happened?
Yeah, well, I know for aerials, I think the water ramp facility itself has become better. The jumps that we used to use for water ramping were not as similar as the jumps that we now create on snow. But now they are very, very similar. So that transition from water to snow is not nearly as different. And really the only thing that you have to modify for on snow is the landing hill, because we obviously land on a very, very steep landing hill. And water, you're landing pretty much, you really don't try to land straight up and down, but we try to land with our tips going into the water. But, aside from that, there's still tons of trampoline training, and I don't think that I think where, at least for aerials, it's changed is more time on snow. The more time that we can actually train on snow, so more training camps have come about where we've been able to, where the team's been able to be on snow more often.
So with luge, it's hard to see when you watch it on TV or even when you're standing at the track and a sled goes by at 90 miles an hour. But the sled there's a lot of technology that goes into the sled. So a single sled, and women just do singles, men can do singles or doubles. But the single sled weighs about 50 pounds. So it is there's a part that you lie in. Your body is sort of in a fiberglass shell. There are handles that you hold onto, and then runners that go the whole length of the sled. Attached to that on the bottom are steels, and they are there's sort of a lot of technological espionage in the sport. So people are always trying to see what other countries are doing. And when I was on the team, and it's definitely still true today, our coach would make the sleds. So everything. So it's from the fiberglass to the runners. The steels are that's probably the most technologically complicated part of the sled and the most important. And it's really it's like very nuanced, sort of what metals comprise the runners and what goes fast, and sometimes it's just really hard to know. You might have steels that are made, like two made exactly, of the same material at the same time, and one will be faster than the other. So it's like, yes, there's a lot of technology, but there's also some art to it as well. So I had one of our assistant coaches from Italy one summer. He said, "Okay, so we think these steels are really fast, but what I want you to do this summer is to," and I'm not joking here, "bury them in your backyard so the sun and the moon can get on the steels, and I think they'll go even faster." I was like, "Okay, I'll do that.
I'll try anything."
And they were fast. I have no idea if it was like burying in the backyard. It required a lot of sanding to get the rust off, but so there's definitely a lot of technology in the sleds. I didn't mention before, one part of the training in the summertime is practicing the start on ice. So in Lake Placid, there's an indoor start ramp facility, so you can practice the start on ice. You go, down the ramp and then up the other side, because it makes a really big difference, sort of being on ice versus being on wheels, which is possible, but you don't really get the same sort of feel. One of the start ramps it's actually the one at the track in La Plagne in France, where the Olympics were in '92. So the ramp is so steep that when with luge, you're sitting on the sled at the start, hands are on the handles. So normally you can see the ramp, see the first curve. This ramp, it's so steep, you can't see it. So you're sitting at the start, you can't see the ramp, and you just see the first curve. You're like, okay, I hope I'm going to go straight down there. But, I always had to pray a little.
So that leads into my question, which is, most of this audience, I don't want to assume anyone, maybe some people have, but most of this audience has probably never gone down a luge ramp at 80 plus miles an hour or flipped multiple times on skis. Can you describe that experience of being in the air, or when you get down that ramp in the first curve?
Go ahead.
Oh, goodness. Gosh, it is so difficult to describe what it's like to be 60 feet in the air. I was actually the first woman in the world to do a triple twisting double backflip and a double twisting triple backflip.
Can you demonstrate?
Yeah. Not so much right here. But, oh my goodness. It is, I think, I'm scared of heights, so if you put me on top of it, I know everyone says, "Oh my gosh, you're an aerialist. How can you be afraid of?" But just looking out, and down is just nerve-wracking to me. It makes my legs all weak. But going, you're doing something in the air. You're coming down. You're not focused on really how high you are, except for you need to get your feet under you. But it's just an amazing feeling of, it's, like I said, it's hard to put in words. You're at the top of the in-run, and you definitely have to figure out how to channel the fear in a really positive, productive way. Otherwise, you'll never be an aerialist. Mm-hmm. But the adrenaline rush that you get, coming down and doing a triple flip and landing and skiing away, when you're down at the bottom, it is such an intense amount of emotion in all of 6 seconds. And it's just amazing. I always say this, and I love my husband to death, but I really haven't found quite something that's given me quite the adrenaline rush that Ariel's has. That might be too much information, but nonetheless, that's the way it goes. On to you.
Okay, luge. Luge is the fastest of all of the sliding sports. So it's faster than bobsled, it's faster than skeleton, and it's actually the only Olympic sport timed to the thousandth of a second. So the fastest track in the world is Vancouver. From the men's start is about 97 miles an hour. So I've not gone that fast. I've been from the men's start in Park City and gone about 87 miles an hour. So fast enough. So if you've driven that fast in your car, imagine sort of that speed lying on your back on a fairly small sled going down an ice track. Some of the tracks are, and every track is different. So some tracks are sort of wide open curves. Of course, like you have to steer on all of them, but some requires less. Some require less steering. So the one in Park City is a little more like an autobahn. It's very fast, not a ton of steering, a really fun kind of smooth ride down. There are other tracks, however, that are really technically difficult, and if you don't steer in exactly the right place at exactly the right time, you'll crash. So I liked those tracks, and I was good at those.
Great. So let's go to the first Olympics, as you both are multi-time Olympians. And at first Olympics, what was the emotion when you first qualified, and then what was the emotion at the opening ceremonies when you were there? Were you really excited to be there and ready to go, or were you really nervous about the competition? Kind of what was going through your head?
So my first games was in '88 in Calgary, and that year to qualify for the team, there were a series of races in Lake Placid. So I qualified, it's like, you know, when you qualify, it's like, okay, I've made the Olympic team, super excited about that. But it wasn't really until I walked into the opening ceremonies that I thought, oh my gosh, like I've made the Olympic team. I'm here representing the United States, and I was 19 at my first games, so I had spent sort of 8 years preparing for that moment. And with that games, I didn't really have any particular expectation about my finish. Like I didn't really expect that I had a chance to win a medal. So I was really just going to do my best and hopefully have as good a race as I possibly could. So that games I was ninth. I had great runs. I was like happy with the result, and had a few more games after that. But yeah, so it's that moment, I think, when you walk into the opening ceremonies is a pretty special one.
Yeah, yeah. So mine was 1994, and I was 26. And actually, Cameron was the flag bearer at the 1994 Olympic Games, so that's a huge honor. And the flag bearer is voted by our teammates. So she was voted by all of us to be the flag bearer, which was amazing. For me, also, my brother was actually, after he retired, went on to coach the Australian freestyle ski team in aerials. So 1994 is again a family affair. He was coaching aerials while I was competing. So and my parents were over there. So that was something that was just obviously amazing. And like Cameron said, the process of at least for freestyle, of qualifying for the games is a pretty long one. And so we didn't find out our team until like 2 weeks before the game. So yes, that's a step. But my mentality going into all the Olympics as well was to make sure that I had a degree of difficulty that if I won or could win, I just put myself in a place to win. And that was just always, like, the Olympics is not a place to hold back. So that was just, Lillehammer just for sure was just an amazing, amazing first games. But I will say my last games, real quick, is that it's rare that an Olympian gets to compete in their own home country during your career, let alone your own backyard. So I live in Park City, Utah. So the fact that Salt Lake City held the 2002 Olympic Games was amazing, and that was how I got to end my career. So it was pretty cool.
So
I thought about going for a fifth because 98 was my last Olympics in Nagano, Japan, and for that reason, because 2002 was in the United States, I thought, maybe one more, but decided to go to law school instead. So. Nearly as much fun as although I was in Park City because, as Tracy mentioned, I carried the flag at the opening ceremonies in '94, which was a huge honor and really humbling, and to be there, sort of for the U.S. team and really for everybody back home as well. Yeah. So, although when I was each sport nominates someone to carry the flag, and then the team captains of all of the sports vote on who will be elected. And Dan Jansen and Bonnie Blair were nominated. And I was like, okay, so this is kind of going to be like the Oscars. And I'm really honored to have been nominated in this great pool of people. And then I got picked. Yeah. But so I was super surprised and really honored. But in Salt Lake City, the organizing committee invited all of the flag bearers to come and run with the torch from the opening ceremony stadium to the first medal ceremony. So, and everyone who had carried the flag from, basically who was living and who could come and manage to carry the torch. And they said, they're like, well, you're young and like in pretty good shape and all of that. And I was like, okay, I'm working in a law firm on Wall Street, like 20 hours a day. And I can't remember the last time I worked out. So, so when we were running, you had to run behind like the van with the camera on you the entire time. So I thought, and I was like, oh my gosh, my arm's really tired, Like if I drop it, like should I switch hands? Like that's not really gonna look good. But if I drop it, that's even worse. But it was all
And
okay.
you're trying not to huff and puff.
I know. It's like, oh my gosh, yeah.
So is that more nerve-wracking or carrying the flag in the opening ceremony?
Well, before I walked into the stadium at the opening ceremonies in Lillehammer, the director of marketing for USA Luge said, "Oh, so like 2 billion people are watching the Olympics, so don't trip and fall with the flag." I was like, "Really? Like you had to say that?"
Tell me that right now.
I didn't. It was all good, but.
So Tracy brought up a good point that you got to compete in your home country and really hometown.
Yeah.
Did you ever feel when you went on the road that you didn't get enough practice time or the courses were different? Or I guess, what was that experience being at a road course? Or was it common practice since you traveled throughout the year?
Yeah, no, I think one of the things that, even in Cameron sport, that's one of the things as an athlete you have to be able to do is be able to change from site to site, from week to week, and you have to be flexible. You have to know how to adjust and deal with obstacles and all that kind of thing. So, not really. I mean, that was something throughout all our years of training that we were used to on a weekly basis. Like I said, World Cup was a different site every single week. So every Sunday we would travel somewhere else and then train a couple days and compete and do it again somewhere else. So you just learn to adapt.
What about the tracks? Luge tracks are very different.
Well, yeah, so the luge tracks are very different, but I'll just mention that when I made the national team when I was 15 and my first couple of years on the team, there was still East Germany and Soviet Union and Yugoslavia, and like we went to all of those places. So it was a really great adventure among other things being on the team at that time.
Yeah.
Food was always a challenge. I'm like, I cannot identify that whatever is on my plate right now. So you'd always bring like peanut butter and jelly with you, just in case. So yeah, luge tracks are definitely like very different from track to track. And the U.S., we're at a little bit of a disadvantage because Germany has 4 tracks. Germans sort of run the international federation, and there tend to be 3 or 4 World Cups on German tracks every year. So usually the way it works with countries is that if you have a track, U.S. has a track that everyone else wants to train on, Germany, they have a track people want to train on, you might swap training times. No one wanted to train on the track in Lake Placid, so it was kind of worth nothing in sort of track time leverage. So we ended up getting like not great training times, and with the luge track, it's about. So luge, bobsled, and skeleton all go on the same track. From the top of the course, some tracks are nearly a mile long. So most of them are concrete. There are pipes running throughout the entire track, and there's a big refrigeration plant that pumps some ammonia compound throughout the pipes, and you spray water on the track, and it makes ice. However, one thing that the Germans liked to do when we were training on their tracks was like give us track time at like 9 o'clock at night. And yeah, great. And then 6 o'clock the next morning. And then they would crank up the refrigeration so it grows like frost on the ice. So the track would be really slow when we were training, and in luge, because it's so fast and it's timed to the thousandth of a second. If the track is even like half a second slow, it makes a really big difference in your timing and in how you steer. So training, there would be like all sorts of frost on the ice, and then race day. I mean, literally, you would sit on your sled and like look at the ice at the start and think like, oh, like I can see my reflection in the ice. It's like so the ice would be like really hard and really smooth and very fast. So that was always a little bit of a challenge, but like Tracy said, you adapt. It's something that you learn how to do as an athlete.
Yeah, yeah. It's so different for aerials. It's like, so, we have 4 jumps, and there's usually 2 double kickers and 2 triple kickers, and we arrive there, and they're just big, piles of snow that are, that we have to basically go shape. So there's certain shapers on our, from different countries, and so each jump is shaped just a little bit different. Sometimes people like steep jumps. Some people like a little bit less at the top, so it doesn't throw you up quite so much. It throws you out. But everybody, I don't know, that definitely, we all trained at the same time. Everybody was very supportive, and not that that's not an extreme sport, but I don't know, there was definitely a camaraderie between our countries and between everyone to make sure that the jumps were just right for everybody. So, yeah.
Well, you have family that's a coach from another country, too.
Well, yeah, exactly, that too. But yeah.
Yeah, definitely a little different dynamic in luge, I think. And I think the Olympics in Vancouver are probably a pretty good example of that, because so prior to Vancouver, the 2 other times Canada hosted the Olympics, so Montreal in '76 and then '88 in Calgary, they didn't win any gold medals, 0 at home, which is really unusual.
Yeah.
So you usually kind of have the home field advantage, and you're going to win more gold medals. Canada had not done that, so they were determined, I think, in Vancouver to make sure that they won gold. So one of the strategies, they funded a lot of athletes they thought had the chance to win medals, and then the other strategy was to limit access to Olympic venues for athletes from other countries. So if you are a figure skater or a hockey player, maybe not such a big deal, because a lot of the rinks are fairly similar and maybe a little bit different, ice quality or it's slightly different dimensions, but fairly much the same. Luge, not so much, and that was the fastest track in the world. So actually, the day before the opening ceremonies, an athlete from Georgia died on the track. So awful. He had 25 runs, and I think the average Canadian had 250. Wow. So, yeah, it matters.
So let's pivot to post-Olympics.
Yes.
So there's a lot of Olympians, in some cases, struggle post-professional athletic career in pivoting to a new career. You two have done very well. So can you tell us what you're doing now and talk about maybe your foundation as well?
Sure. So gosh, I retired after obviously I retired after the '98 games, took 2 years off, and went down to California and started a division of my brother's sports marketing company.
You went to a warm place for 2 years.
I'm jealous. Did. Needed a break. Anyway, and started a sports casting company, and placing athletes in different sport production, mainly commercial and print stuff. It was a great break, and I came back obviously for the 2002 games, and then afterwards went back to casting. So I feel just very fortunate. I mean, I did finish getting my degree. It took me 10 years, but I had done that while I was.
It only took me 7.
I had my 10-year high school reunion the weekend I was walking on my college degree. Yeah, but anyway. So I feel pretty fortunate that I had a pretty smooth transition. I also was very much that's just my personality. I knew I had to have something to move on to, and so having a business that was already somewhat set up was great, and I did that for a long time, and still doing that. But also along the way, I went on a volunteer trip to my mother's prompting, basically, and ended up starting a foundation called Kids Play International. And this really, truly is my absolute passion, without a doubt. And it was really this one little boy's words, 10 years old. His name's Thomas. I went on a volunteer trip, and he said to me at the end of the trip, "I can see girls can play." And the background to that is that we were there
in Africa,
in Malawi, Africa. Yep. And basically, of course, we were playing soccer, but we also introduced some new sports with the boys and girls over there. And obviously, developing countries, girls just are not encouraged to play sport. So when we actually pulled out baseball and softball after playing soccer, where the boys were just absolutely aggressive and the girls stood there like orange cones and wouldn't interact very well together. But we pulled out baseball, softball, and it just leveled the playing field. They had never picked up a bat, never played, never heard of the sport, never played the sport. And it was just for me to watch how differently boys and girls were learning side by side, and just that everything that sport and the Olympic values have taught me. And I really came back after that trip and decided that I wanted to do something with gender equality and sport. And so, it's been about 10 years in the making. We have a year-round program in Rwanda, Africa, and it's really all about building better relationships between boys and girls from a very young age. Boys and girls are so segregated in developing countries from an early age that it's just, through our program, it definitely goes from simple to complex learning. But it's been an amazing journey, and such a great way to be able to take everything that sport has given me and pay it forward a bit. So.
And you're involved too. In,
I am an athlete ambassador, and I've been
yes.
I've been to Rwanda, where our program is, a couple of times, and I went first in 2011, and it was really like one of the best things I think that I've done, sort of at the using sport in a way that makes a difference. So I went back this last summer on a trip that was funded by a State Department grant, and it's amazing to sort of see the difference that the program has made in the community. So not just with the kids, but the parents and teachers and everyone had like really great stories of how the Let's Play Fair program has impacted them personally. So.
And you're also, you went to law school after.
I did. So my 98 was my last games, and I went to law school that fall. And I decided to go to law school because I had been on the U.S. Olympic Committee Board of Directors and on the Athletes Advisory Council for 8 years. And there are a lot of lawyers in sport. NBA is nothing but attorneys. So true in Olympic sport as well. A lot of lawyers practicing or working at a sports organization, and I thought, oh well, maybe that's an interesting way to sort of combine professional career with my interest in sport. Wasn't quite sure how that was going to happen, but it seemed like a good sort of general direction anyway. So I went to BC for law school, and oh yay, right on. I spent I've worked I've been in New York since I graduated law school. So I worked on Wall Street at a big firm, Milbank Tweed, for 2 years. Kind of went through the law firm boot camp, and then I went to a smaller media and entertainment boutique. That had really interesting clients. So I worked on the last J.D. Salinger copyright infringement case. Nike was a client. So I mostly litigated intellectual property cases. While I was there, I also had, because I'd been involved with the U.S. Olympic Committee after I graduated law school, I put my name, there was like a list of lawyers who were available to athletes who had some kind of issue. So I put my name on the list, and I got a call from an athlete who had tested positive for some drug called modafinil, and there were actually like 3 or 4 athletes. I represented all of them, and so that I settled that case. And when you're a lawyer, it's like you're learning something new all the time, especially when you're litigating. So I knew, of course, knew the whole drug testing routine, but it was from the lawyer's perspective, I kind of enjoyed the process. But at the end of that first case, one of my clients, Christy Gaines, so she was a 2-time gold medalist and ran on the 4x100 meter relay team with Marion Jones. You can probably see where this is going. She was one of the athletes who was sort of caught up in the Balco investigation in California, and that ended up being like a 16-month-long made new law in the doping world kind of case. But so I practiced law for 10 years, and the spring of my last year, I got a call from NYU, and they asked me to come speak on a panel about women in sports. So I did that. I went out to dinner with the faculty afterward, and the academic director at the time said, "Oh, we'd love you to come teach a class." I'm like, "Right, in my free time, practicing law in New York." Okay. So actually, I left my firm. I went to Rwanda with Tracy, and then that summer, NYU, they sent an email. It was a Monday, and they said, "Would you be interested in teaching international sports governance?" And I thought, "Oh, well, I know that world. It's like the IOC and National Olympic Committees." And I said, "Great, I'd love to." So I said yes to that, and then on Friday they called and they said, "How about sports law? Can you teach that?" I'm like, "Well, I don't know. What are the topics?" So I looked at this. It's a pretty broad survey course, and a lot of the things like IP, I'm like, fine, like I did that for 10 years. I can certainly teach that. But antitrust and labor law were on the syllabus, and I said, okay, just full disclaimer here, I don't know anything about these areas of law like at all. And they said, it's no problem. You can learn it. And I'm like, okay. So and I think that's something like that's in my nature anyway, being a luge athlete. Like I'm really not afraid of anything. So I'm like, yeah, sure, why not? I can do that. So I did. The first semester was a little bit of a learning curve. International sports governance was great. I had terrible reviews in my sports law class. Like I cried. I'm like, oh God, it's awful. And I said, listen, like I said to the academic director, I said, if you want to get someone else to teach the class, totally fine with me. Like, I don't need this kind of thing. And he said, go, take the Christmas break and come back. But I think you should teach it one more time. I said, oh God, all right. So I came back and I thought, okay. And again, I think both of us, as athletes, we're very determined, and you don't get to 3 or 4 Olympic Games without having some sense of feeling like you can accomplish what you set out to do. So I said, okay, I'll give it another try, and it was great. And so that was 7 years ago. I'm on the full-time faculty in the sports business program, and I love it.
Awesome. So let's briefly talk. The Olympics are coming up in a couple weeks. What advice would you give to a first-time athlete going to their first Olympics?
Oh. Okay. Oh, go ahead.
Oh gosh. I think you're so obviously focused on just your sport, and obviously that's what you should be focused on, and competing and all of that. But I think for me, it was always about also a balance. I could not, at least as for the way I worked as an athlete, I could not 24 hours a day think about my sport. It really did me a disservice. And so I always like to try to remind people to take a little bit of, do something else that will take your mind off of it. And that doesn't mean go party in the, outside, before your event or anything like that.
We don't do that anyway.
No, nobody did that. But anyway, or spend too much time in the cafeteria. That was the big thing. Everyone said, do not spend so much time in the cafeteria inside the Olympic Village, because that was just the biggest social place ever. But anyway, but it is, they're really, you really should just, be able to take a little bit of time away from your sport. And so balance your Olympic experience. And it's okay to, like I said, go out and enjoy yourself, mostly after your event, but even leading up to it, to have a good balance of, I think, just mental. The physical side of it, at that point, you're not rushing. I mean, yes, you're maintaining whatever you need to do, but you're not looking to get a major workout in to hope that your quads are stronger for landing at that point. But it's really it's such a mental point at that. I always say after the Olympics, people say gosh, how do you feel after your event's over, after the Olympics are over? And I literally felt like I had held my breath for about 4 years. And then so when you finally were done, the exhaustion, it's really hard to describe, but it's like you finally get to breathe again before you just start ramping it up again. But still, you do. It's exhausting. So my advice also, is just to make sure that you give yourself a little bit of a break.
So I would say to try not to be distracted by everything that's going on at the games, because Tracy, I'm sure would agree. It is such a different experience than any other race that you go to. So if you're on the World Cup tour, you're there with only luge athletes, and everybody goes from track to track, and you see the same people, at training and in the race. And in that context, with the team, you stay in a hotel, you eat all of your meals together, like at the same time. There's a room where you keep your sleds, where you can work on your sleds. You get your sled, you go put it in the van, you drive to the track. It's pretty, it's pretty simple. At the Olympics, it's an entirely different thing. So you're staying at the village with people from, I think what I last read for Pyeongchang, there are 93 countries right now sending athletes to the games. So you're in a village with, athletes from dozens and dozens of countries. You're not eating necessarily, where the dining hall is maybe not right where you stay, and where your equipment is stored is someplace else. So logistically, it's much more complicated, and there's so much
media
going on.
You're definitely being pulled on that.
Definitely media requests, press conferences, and so there's a lot that can sort of draw you, I think, outside of your zone of focus during the games. Luge, I felt like we were always really lucky because the race is at the beginning of the Olympics every time. So it's the opening ceremonies are on Friday, men's singles race on Saturday and Sunday. The women are on Monday and Tuesday, doubles on Wednesday, and then you're done. So it's like 6 days into the games. There are 11 more days to go, and you can go, So you go see your teammates compete, and then you figure out which sponsors are having the best parties.
Yeah. See, for aerials,
after competition.
moguls was always first, and aerials was always second week. So we actually, for Nagano, did not even show up for opening ceremonies. We were at a training camp before we even. Before we came. So we came well into the first week of the games. And there's definitely a lot of distractions for sure. I always found it so nice, like you said, when we actually got to our site, it felt like home, because you're obviously that's the familiarity of your sport being there, and you're right. Nothing can prepare you for when you look down. And, well, it's different probably at the top of a track, but for us at the top of a hill, you look out and see the entire all the spectators, and it's massive. Like we obviously have spectators at World Cups and World Championships. Nothing was like the first time. I was like, oh wow, let's not focus on that. Let's just turn around and just think about what we're doing, not everyone down there. In fact, this is a very funny story. In 2002 in Deer Valley, where our site was, I was at the top of the hill just training, and man, I could just hear somebody down at the bottom really just annoying yelling something. I was like, God, who is that? Land, ski, do a practice jump, come down, back up, same thing, come down again. And I'm really wow, I don't know why this is really irritating me. It was my family. That's why. It was my family. And I was like, oh my gosh. I went over, found my phone, called my brother, said, you need to go over there and tell them to be quiet. I was like, oh my gosh, that is really annoying. So it's amazing that kind of you heard that.
Recognize
but
those places.
Yes, exactly. So anyway.
So I do want to open up to audience questions. There's microphones on both sides.
And maybe we'll just mention that we're both going to the Olympics in Pyeongchang.
Yep.
So I'm an arbitrator on the Court of Arbitration for Sport, and I'm one of 6 arbitrators who will decide any doping case that comes up at the Olympics. So I'll be over there for the whole time doing that.
Yeah.
I think all of the Russian cases will be taken care of by then. And Tracy's going to be there as well.
Yeah.
Getting an award.
Well, yeah.
Yeah.
So I have a fun question. If people want to start lining up. My fun question is, what is the craziest, wildest, family-friendly story of things you saw during the Olympic Village, in the Olympic Village?
Oh, goodness. Family-friendly? Wow. Goodness. Well, there...
I don't know that I have any.
Yeah.
I'm a lawyer. I have no stories.
You have no stories. Yeah, exactly. No, I think just with the Olympic Village, really, it has everything and anything. If you wanted to go get your hair done, go get your nails done, they had a disco, a bar. No, there was no alcohol inside.
Okay, I do have a story.
Okay.
Speaking of bars.
Yeah. There was no alcohol on campus, was
you
there?
finish your story.
Yeah, okay. Anyway, and I don't know. There's, it was just very much an all-inclusive, but it was just a very unique all-inclusiveness.
Experience.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So in 1992, the Olympics were in France, in Albertville, and the main village was in the city of Albertville. But none of the venues were very close to town, so you had to drive basically 2 hours to any venue, and you'd have to drive down a valley and then up a mountain, and then to get to any other venue, you'd have to go back down the mountain, back to, down the valley to Albertville, and then out in some other directions. So at that games, the luge athletes and bobsled athletes were together in a sort of separate village, and it was a Club Med in La Plagne, and there was beer and wine on tap. Well, it was they were treated. It was like the sort of Club Med practices were still going on.
Yeah.
So drive around with a cheese cart, and I think after maybe like the first 5 days of the games, maybe we drank like all of the wine and beer and ate all of the cheese or something. But they're like, okay, maybe we need to cut all of that off.
Yeah, exactly.
We have an audience question.
Thanks so much for coming. I'm curious, just given how intense the training is between games, how athletes support themselves sort of year to year to year as their careers sort of stretch.
Yeah, great question. So I was on the national team for 14 years, and luge had and still has some. There's like a race incentive program, so you can, depending on where you finish in World Cup races, win money that comes from the U.S. Luge Association. So I did well enough that I got enough money that I supported myself through that, and there were also grants available like through the U.S. Olympic Committee. So I feel like I was fairly fortunate in that respect, that I didn't have to work like that much. I did some at school, but otherwise I didn't really have that really big challenge, I think, of sort of balancing work and training at the same time. But so I think some athletes sort of survive that way. Some have sponsorships that help support them, and then others I think it can be a really big challenge to
absolutely
to support yourself.
Yeah, same here. I mean, we would have ski sponsors, boot sponsors, headgear sponsors. So you would set up a retainer with your sponsor and then a victory schedule depending on how well you did throughout the year, or if you made the World Championship team, you get a bonus for that, or obviously Olympic team and all of that. And also for us, the way you were on A team, B team, C team, so you would get some funding from your federation as well, cover flight and travel and training expenses, basically. But having said that, exactly, what's really difficult, I think, in general with sport is when you're trying to come up through the ranks. It's such a double-edged sword because you can't get sponsors without results. Well, you can't get results until you actually start competing. And so it is so difficult, I think, for upcoming athletes to be able to, unless you have parents that can finance it, you have to get a second job. Eric Burgess, gold medalist in 1998, lived out of his car, ate peanut butter and jelly sandwiches for I don't know how many summers and years. I mean, that you just wanted to do it. One good thing is the Olympic training centers now, Lake Placid, and Colorado Springs, depending on your sport, you can go there and live and have that. But again, you have to also have worked your way up to a certain point. So it's difficult. Yeah, it's not always an easy. Unfortunately, you probably lose some really incredible talent just due to lack of support.
And I think in Olympic sport, most athletes don't have, really big sponsors or,
Right.
a ton of financial support. So like the
Yeah.
Michael Phelps of the world are, very few and
Yeah.
far between in Olympic sports. So most of us do it because, we
love
love it.
You love it. Yeah, the shelf life of even a gold medalist these days is so short, especially now with the Olympics being every 2 years. So as soon as, the Winter Games are over, boom, you've got maybe a month to kind of really, if you want to medal and do everything with media that you can, try to, reap those benefits. But then sponsors are looking at the next Olympics already, right after that. So again, there's clearly exceptions to to those rules for sure. But majority of Olympians, you gotta love what you do. You gotta love the sport. You gotta love it. You're not gonna, even if you are gold medal, does not mean you are set for life. So.
Do you have an audience question?
Hi, I have two questions. The first is actually related to what you were just talking about with this shift from being every 2 years with winter and summer versus when they were concurrent, like how you saw things change. And the other is, can you talk about your day-to-day or like a week? What would a week look like with training, and how did your training groups change as you went from one Olympics to the next?
So I kind of went through that the transition from when the summer and winter games were in the same year to being staggered every two. So 1992 was the last year that summer and winter were in the same year, and then winter was
94,
again
yeah.
in '94. So normally, which it sounds great, like I had 4 Olympics in 10 years, but actually that was it was a really quick turnaround
Yeah.
because normally, like after a games, you've kind of got a year where you might experiment with your equipment and try a new sled or some different things that because you've got some
Recover.
time leading up to the next games. But after '92, it was like, okay, we're actually that next season you were
Yeah.
qualifying for the Olympics again already. So I think though that it's for winter sports particularly, I think it's good that it's that the games are every 2 years because the media can focus on give as much attention almost to winter
Yeah.
as to summer. So I think that for in general it's positive. And on the training front, it's different sort of in the winter and the summer, sort of in season and out of season. But in season, usually we would be at like a track for no longer than a week. So if you're in the World Cup season, the race ends on Sunday. You pack up all of your stuff and. Luge, like the equipment is heavy, and one time we were in the airport, and there was a scale in the floor, and we actually put all of the stuff on you had to weigh it, and we're paying like extra baggage fees, but I mean, we literally had a ton of equipment. So you had to pack that up every Sunday into the cargo van, and then you drive to the next place. So usually then Monday, like afternoon, you'd be on the track. You'd train twice a day on the track, get a physical workout in, work on your sled, take a nap, eat. So it's you're pretty much in a routine.
Yeah.
Summertime, it's you might be. I was at Dartmouth a lot of the time, or in Lake Placid, and that's more like in the gym, doing start practice and more physical training.
Yeah. So my first Olympics was '94, and my first year on the team was '91. So that you're having been in Olympics and then have to turn around. I did not experience that, but I was actually very happy when I got on the team that the Olympics were coming again in 2 years. So for me, that's and I agree. I think it's good for Winter Olympics to be its own. Its own year, so to speak, because I do think that when they were concurrent, that summer always kind of overshadowed winter. So anyway, I think it's a good thing. So training, gosh, for training for aerials, our summertime training is definitely far more intense than it is when we're on the road. Once you're on the road and competing week to week, it's more of a maintenance type of mentality, so to speak. But our summer training definitely was pretty intense. We would get up and have a couple hours on the trampoline. We'd do a couple hours water ramping. We'd have lunch. We'd go to the gym for another couple hours, and sometimes even a trampoline session at nighttime. So it kind of we inside the gym, so to speak. But So yeah, and you were just really trying to, you would definitely, I think it depends on where you are in your career. Obviously, if you're just starting off and you're a rookie, you're really trying to do a lot more jumps and qualifying a lot of jumps. As you're becoming more of a veteran on the team, you're trying to have a different type of training. It's quality over quantity, basically. So that's kind of how it worked, in the summertime. Everyone kind of had more of an individualized plan depending on what you were doing with your jumps. And then the winter, pretty much what Cameron said. I mean, it's week to week traveling. You'd get into a site on Monday. You would work on the jumps. You would hopefully at least have one day of training on the jump. Sometimes with weather, you didn't even get to train on the jump till the day you competed, which was never fun. But usually you have at least 1 or 2 days of training. You'd compete, back up, move on to the next place. So.
And probably one thing I would add to this for both of us would be maybe later in your career, you might spend some time in sports medicine doing some rehab on your various joints. I had 4 knee surgeries and 1 on each shoulder. So it definitely takes a toll on the body.
For a skier, I actually have both my ACLs, which is very rare. So I feel like I got out of the sport pretty unscathed. Yeah, I definitely have some things, but.
Well, Tracy, Cameron, thank you for being here.
Thank you so much.
Thanks everyone for coming. And that's it. So.
Awesome. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.